Okay then, so before we start talking too much about Vue, I just wanted to address a few major updates to the Vue framework in version 3. Now, you may never have used Vue 2 before, which is fine. You don't need to be familiar with Vue 2 before you start this course. And in that case, much of this video might not make much sense, but don't worry, I'll explain all of these features in more detail later in the course, and we'll be learning everything from the ground up. But for those who have used Vue 2 before, I thought this would be a nice way to give you a brief overview of what's new in Vue 3. So, the Vue team have been working on version 3 for what seems like an eternity, but it's finally here and it comes with some nice improvements. The main one is the introduction of the Composition API, and this basically opens up a whole new way of creating Vue apps. It improves reusability, organization, and readability of our code, especially for more complex components. Now, it does this by giving us access to a setup function inside components where we can tap into some of Vue's core functionality. It's a really nice addition to the framework, and we'll be using it a lot later in the course, mainly in the second half of the course. The next big change is that we can now have multiple root elements for a component template. So before, we'd have to wrap everything inside a single root element inside the template, but now we can have as many root elements side by side as we like. A bit like this, we have two divs right here and they are both root elements. That wasn't allowed in Vue 2, but in Vue 3 this is absolutely fine. So this is definitely a good thing because it reduces the amount of unnecessary HTML code in our web page. Another new feature is the teleport components, and the teleport component basically allows us to render content from one component in a completely different part of the DOM. So this is really useful for things like modals that you might always want to show at the very bottom of the body tag, but they might be nested somewhere in a component tree in your application. So this is really nice, and we'll see this later on. There's also a suspense component, which allows us to handle asynchronous code and components very easily and provide fallback content until any data is loaded, like a custom spinner or loader, for example. And another huge update is that it comes with TypeScript support out of the box. So if you prefer writing your code in TypeScript, now you can. So this is a really good step forward for TypeScript developers. In this course, I will be using JavaScript, but I will be releasing a small Vue and TypeScript course on my YouTube channel soon for free. Aside from those changes, there are a few others like multiple vModels for custom components, improved reactivity and performance gains, etc. But the ones I've mentioned here are the big ones, and we'll work with most of them throughout this course at some point, especially the Composition API, which is the chunky part of the update. So again, don't worry if none of that made sense and you're completely new to Vue. I won't assume any prior knowledge, and we'll cover everything from the very beginning. If you have used Vue 2 before and you wanted to jump straight into the new stuff, I'd suggest skipping to chapter 9, where we start to talk about the Composition API, because the first half of the course, or most of it, will focus on the basics of Vue. So that includes things like data binding, routing, the Options API, etc. The second half of the course, I will shift to the Composition API and all the newer features which can only be used with Vue 3. In the second half, we'll also use Firebase as a backend for our Vue sites too, so we'll see how Firebase and the Composition API can work together nicely as well.